There's an endless discussion in the photography world whether using a filter in front of your lens to protect it from scratches reduces image quality. I've done a test with 3 different filters and it changed my mind. My name is Amri, I'm an award-winning photographer and filmmaker who teaches photography in a very unique online course. For decades I had my personal view of things when it came to those UV filters. No idea why, because usually I do my own research. Long story short, I ordered 3 different filters with 3 different price points from Amazon. An Amazon Basics filter for almost nothing, namely $5.40, a high-end filter from B&W that costs almost 12 times as much, and a K&F filter that sits right in between those two. I wanted to know, does a filter reduce image quality, and could it be that some do and others don't? I have put them to the test in beautiful Palais Schönbrunn in my hometown Vienna. Yes, I have come to the conclusion that the grass is equally green on my side, so I don't have to travel far to create YouTube videos. I have first tested without a filter and then started with the cheapest filter, going to the most expensive one. First a shot with the sun coming from the side. Adding the cheap filter, I see there is a slight difference in image brightness. The cheap Amazon filter blocks about 1/10 of a stop. But that is basically negligible. I just wanted to mention that for all the nerds out there. If I compensate for that, surprisingly the images are basically indistinguishable. Neither does the sharpness change nor the color, and that is from viewing on a big monitor. On a smartphone you definitely won't see a difference. And no surprise, if the cheap filter doesn't change anything, the more expensive filter didn't change anything either. So except for that negligible difference in brightness, all 3 filters created the same results. And even more importantly, they created the same result that I got without a filter. But that was for scenarios where the sun won't enter the camera. Let's see if that changes if we have the sun in the frame, because the big bonus of expensive filters is their coating. First without the filter, and then I'll add the cheap Amazon filter again. Now we do see quite a difference. The shadows are washed out and there is some sun flare going on. The washed out shadows remind me a bit of the cinematic haze filters that some people deliberately use, so for some people that might not be a big issue. The flare on the other hand can be annoying, but if you're on a budget it's not as bad as I would have expected. And also other than initially expected, the image quality, so the sharpness didn't change at all. Again. If we now compare the UV filter from K&F to the Amazon filter, the haze is gone, but a bit of flare is still present that is not visible in the shot without the filter. So it's time to bring the most expensive filter to the stage. Comparing that to the no filter shot, we actually see no difference at all. The small flare here was already present in the no filter shot. However, I took it a bit further. This was shot on a 60-35mm lens at 16mm. When I zoomed in on the 35mm, I basically zoomed in on the flare, so that increased the problems for the 2 lower priced filters, but the expensive filter still shines. So the longer the lens, the bigger the problem. However, usually with a longer lens you can easier avoid having the sun in your frame, and or can make better use of the lens hood so that no unwanted sunlight enters the camera. So using the right filter doesn't affect the image quality at all, but comes with a few advantages. The most obvious one is accidentally scratching the lens surface, but you could theoretically have an insurance for these occasions. That would have the benefit that theft is also covered. And let's be honest, if you drop the lens, there's usually more damage than just the front of the lens. Trust me, I've been there. The cost for insurance should roughly be 3% per year, so for a $1,000 lens you could easily pay 2 years of insurance with all the additional benefits for the cost of the expensive filter. What happens way more often is that I can't find my lens cap. It often reappears magically a day later, but I wouldn't worry to put my camera into the bag without the lens cap if I had a UV filter on it. Also, when I'm out shooting sports and have 2 cameras on my neck, I don't want to always put my lens cap on as I need to react quickly. The better protection is obviously the lens hood, but for some lenses the lens hood isn't much of a protection either. Then, for example, when shooting long jump, I often get sand right onto the lens. Cleaning a filter is obviously much easier than cleaning the front of your lens. And the same is true for sand or salty water at the sea. And another point, I usually don't clean the lens all that often because it's a bit cumbersome and sometimes I feel I might scratch it when cleaning. Cleaning a filter on the other hand gives me much less of a headache. If I scratch it, I replace it. And now the important part of cleaning, that can even improve image quality as small dust particles on your lens could create sun flare, which you would avoid by more often cleaning the filter. One thing that I want to mention though is stacking filters, as that was the main reason that kept me from using them. If you add a polarizer filter on top of the UV filter, or stack for example this magnetic filter system that lets you quickly add or remove for example ND polarizer filters on top of a regular UV filter, and then shoot against the sun or with the sun coming from the side, that sometimes leads to problems depending on the direction the sun is coming from. The light that gets through the filter from a specific angle might reflect on one of the filters and then back onto the other filter and then back into the camera, and that could create some weird effects. It could also potentially create dark corners called vignetting depending on the filters you use. And another con? Some people say that when you drop the lens, the filter can even cause damage to the lens. I just wanted to mention that for a serious debate. Objectively, that's a vague argument, as you don't know how the lens would look like without the filter. It would take a scientific approach of dropping at least 20 to 30 lenses to find out whether one is better. So, do I recommend to use a UV filter? Actually, I do now. While filters don't reduce image quality, what does reduce image quality dramatically is not understanding photography properly. So let me recommend to next watch the Wolf Method photography course. It has the so extremely important repetitions built in, and the crown of it all is that each camera setting has its own entertaining and motivating drill training that will quickly store each setting into muscle memory. Without leaving the house, you can practice aperture, shutter speed, ISO, focus and more with the help of your smartphone, tablet or TV. So what's the difference to other courses? You learn photography really fast and memorable and have fun on the way.